Hello, I am Rebecca Nielsen, a senior psychology major at Thomas More University, and today I will be discussing the results of my experiment over provided information and the effects it has on empathic responses and helping behaviors. This is based off of a question that I asked after reading a study done by Barford, Pope, Harlow, and Hudson that was done in 2014. This study focused on when people engage in helping, or as they called it, prosocial behaviors. And they found that crying can be an influence more so on women, which they stated might be due in part to empathy scores of women generally being higher. Some earlier studies, like the one done by Davis, Hull, Young, and Warren, showed that empathy has multiple dimensions to it, and that audio cues can be used to encourage these empathic responses. And it also showed how your perspective influences your empathic responses. As stated before, this is more of an expanding on a question that came up after reading a previous study. So the main hypothesis is that if more information on a situation is given, then the empathic response can be manipulated to encourage a heightened helping behavior response. And the secondary hypothesis is that women are going to be more likely to respond to the crying stimulus in a positive way, meaning they're more likely to try and help the individual who is crying, in part because empathy is seen to be higher in women based off of previous studies. For my study, I ended up with 29 participants, 18 female and 11 males. I wanted a number that was closer to 180 as a way to encourage the results to be more foundational and more solid. However, that wasn't possible with the time. These students were recruited from the general psychology classes and offered a class credit as an incentive for participation. In order to ensure that there was no potential for affecting the results, participants were assigned to groups randomly with a pre-recorded participant number and an information packet containing a scenario with a little bit of information or a range up to the highest amount of information that was provided. These packets were made by someone outside of the experiment, so I didn't even know which experiment packet had which scenario number. For the methodology lab, participants entered in groups of 4, and they were all given an informed consent process where they were given a brief overview of the experiment, explaining that they would be hearing a crying simulation, and asked if they were still willing to sign the informed consent sheet. Once the process of informed consent had been complete, they were reminded that they could leave at any point if they wanted, and they were handed a packet containing the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire, an anticipated behavioral response questionnaire that was the second of the 2 surveys, and a sheet containing a scenario that they were to read over during the audio portion of the experiment. They were asked to fill out the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire and not to score it, and then after finishing they would turn the page and the crying stimulus was started. The crying portion was used a YouTube video of a woman crying, and after reading the scenario they were asked to fill out the anticipated behavioral response, which is a Likert scale questionnaire, with a 1 being a least likely to respond and help, with a 4 being extremely likely. Once this was completed, the sheets were collected and the process of debriefing began, where it was explained why crying was used and the general purpose of the experiment. They were also given information about how to contact me should they wish to understand the results. Data analysis consisted of adding up the empathy scores to get a number out of 64, using descriptive statistics to find the means of the responses, and the empathy average for both males, females, and overall, and ANOVA on empathy score and the anticipated behavioral response questions, as well as a t-test to analyze and see if there really is a gender difference between empathy scores. These are just a couple of examples of the data collection methods. This shows one of the sheets possible for the groups, as well as what the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire looks like. It is a 16-item inventory that is scored out of 64, with the higher scores generally indicating someone who reports higher with empathy, and then one of the items off of the anticipated behavioral response scale. For the results, the overall mean for the empathy was about 43, almost 44 points out of 64, with females scoring 46 and males scoring at 38, almost 39. The males is a little lower than the average for males' responses, as males generally on the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire score from 43 to 44, while females tend to score within a range of 44.62 to 48.93. This was shown to be statistically significant, with a p-value of 0.025 and a t-value of 2.32 for the overall group. When looking at the ANOVA, not all factors were significant. There were only 4 of the anticipated behavioral response ones that were considered statistically significant, which was the comfort, do nothing, talk to, and ignore items off of the anticipated behavioral response scale. The results show that, in general, women do tend to score higher on the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire, and that helping behavior can be dependent on the information given. It also shows that people are more likely to engage in comforting someone, talking with them, ignoring them, or doing nothing when presented with a crying woman scenario. This may be in part due to empathy, though it is not clear with the current data observations. Some potential explanations for this is that people might be more likely to comfort and talk to an individual because this is what we already do as a society in order to try and calm someone who is going through a rough situation. And the ignoring people and doing nothing might be in part due to the bystander effect, where the people believe that they are not responsible for helping that person and that someone else is more likely to help them. Some future directions that I would personally suggest to try and expand on this would be to try and get more participants. If I was able to continue this, I would definitely try and get more people to do this to see if this trend continues and see how a much wider array of empathy scores would affect the results, as most of these scores that I obtained were within the average to above average range, with some falling below average. And another potential direction would be to see how providing information about a crying male would affect the prosocial behaviors, as crying males are often seen as more difficult to approach than a crying female. These are the references that I have used in the current state of my study, and I look forward to any questions and hope I can answer them for you. Thank you for listening.